guys, welcome to LoveCast, the BL podcast reviews. I'm your host, Alexa, and with me today are my fellow hosts, Kayla and Pixie.
Hey.
Hi.
For our first review of 2025, we are jumping into the Korean BL that took the community by storm at the end of last year, which is Love in the Big City. All right, let's jump into the synopses here. Okay. Love in the Big City, an audacious tale of two roommates, one a gay man and another a straight woman. Through the eyes of Mie begins Go Yeong's clumsy love story. Stories of laughter, tears, and wounds between a mother in denial of her son's sexuality and his being unable to escape societal judgment. Go Yeong finally meets a pure love like no other, Gyu-ho, but has no choice but to let him go. With Gyu-ho gone, Go Yeong follows a stranger to Thailand and spends a late monsoon vacation. Reminiscing about the good old days that can never be retrieved, he achieves complete personal growth. It is an 8-episode series, about 50 minutes each, and it is available to watch on Viki. You will need like one of the Viki premium passes. I used a free like 7-day trial when I watched it and just watched it all in 7 days. So like if you don't want to pay for the pass, I would recommend doing it that way if that's an option for you. But yeah, one of the first things I want to say is I feel like this synopsis really only like covers a portion of what the story was about, and maybe it's a synopsis for the book. Like I'm not sure if the book was set up a little bit differently, but I feel like the show, I guess it was kind of through Mie's perspective, but in that point really only the first 2 episodes, and I feel like the story was about Go Young's love life as a whole, not necessarily just Gyu-ho, although he was obviously like the one that got away of the story. But yeah, I felt like that synopsis just like it was the only one I could find, but I just feel like it doesn't quite encompass everything, at least that the series was trying to do. Maybe that's more of like what was going on in the novel or the movie. But like the series is a little bit more all encompassing of Gyu-ho, I'm sorry, Go Yeong just navigating his queerness overall over the span of like, I don't know, it's like 8 or 10 years, 6, 7, I don't know how many years in total it is, but over like a good chunk of like his young adult life. So yeah, it's I think it's a little bit more encompassing of just being about one relationship or being necessarily through Mie's eyes. But yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, so I think it's set up really interestingly because it's almost like each 2 episodes is like its own arcing story, and then like when you do get to the later episodes, like they all kind of overlap because they're all telling his story, but they also feel kind of like concise as 2 episodes because I know that like different directors did every 2 episodes, so it kind of helps it in breaking up like each relationship almost into like their own little arcs. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I my initial thought of the show was that it was very it was interesting in a very real way. It's kind of like you're watching something and you don't feel like it's fiction, right? Like this feels like reality. And I think like they did it, they did all the messiness in a good way. They told the story in a good way.
Yeah, I think it just felt natural. It felt like a natural progression of relationships in general, especially as like a college student into your 20s, into like I think we're in his 30s when we end the show. I'm honestly not entirely sure. And then like adding the element of being queer in South Korea into that, like it all just felt real. And you know, specifically with the series, I believe that the author of the novel was involved in writing the screenplay for that one. I believe, don't quote me on that 100%. But like you can tell that there was that element, I think, of his personal experience, which I've seen some people say isn't quite as included in the movie version of the adaptation. So yeah, it 100% felt real and raw, and like you really are along on this journey that not doesn't necessarily have a happy ending to every story. So I think that also adds a lot to the element of realness as he navigates his relationships.
I like went into this series knowing that there was a lot of hype around it, but being like, is it that good? But like honestly, I feel like it is. Like I finished it and I was like, I understand the hype for this. And I guess that in a way, like everything that it represents really adds to that hype. Like obviously there was so much backlash from conservative groups in South Korea regarding this series, like protesting and stuff. So I think that it's even a lot more than the series. It's like the existence of it. It's almost like a resistance against hate in a way, which I already thought was really cool. But the story itself, I mean, like so slice of life, pushing the boundaries in a mainstream way. It was really interesting. I think the thing about this series that honestly stuck out to me more than like the romances was the friendship. Like I almost feel like the friendship was the point of the series.
Yeah.
Like yeah, Mireille was like the most real friend ever. Like reminded me so much of like my friends, and then Young's friend group of like queer males, like
It's queer friend
the
group,
yeah, it was very how do you say it? It was very like putting an emphasis on community and like the importance of community and like having people that he could always rely on and lean on. And I just felt like that was like the bigger part of the series for me, or at least that's what I took away the most.
The moment that I cried the most, there were a couple times where like the show definitely got me, but the moment that I cried the most was after his suicide attempt, when he woke up in the hospital and all of his friends were like outside of the room, like banging on the window, like, and then like they saw that he was okay and they like started trying to make him smile. Like I was sobbing in that moment. Like that like moment in particular just like stuck out to me so much. And I even think like towards the end of the show, like the final shot of the show being like I keep saying Go Yeong with his friends on the rooftop watching the fireworks go off while he's like reminiscing on all of these romances, yes, but also just like where he's at now in his life. And at that point, like he is with his friends in the end. Like that's what the show ends on. Like, yeah, I feel like the romance and like what he learned from the romances and how they shaped him was obviously a huge integral part of the story. But the people that were there throughout the whole thing were like, and like Mie, his friendship with Mie kind of had like its own arc, but like especially his queer friend group being the constant for him throughout the entirety of like all these relationships he navigated and everything that he went through was just super impactful. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I really like the fact that we're seeing him go through so many different relationships throughout the whole thing, because we're so used to watching shows that are like, this is the romance. They are going to be together until the end of time, even if they're together for the first time. Like it's the first love they've ever had, and this is the last love they'll ever have, right?
Yeah.
It feels like that. So I appreciate like a show that actually shows that reality of love, that you fall in and out of it, and there's a lot of different kinds, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be love. Sometimes it's obsession, and sometimes it's just convenience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I was going to say like that not every relationship he was in was like this intense whirlwind romance, like especially with the first guy who's I don't remember everyone's names.
No.
where he was obviously way more into Go Yeong than Go Yeong was with him.
Borderline obsession.
Yeah. And then you see Go Yeong reflecting after he dies, like maybe that could have been someone I could have spent like a quiet life with, but like that just wasn't where he was at in that point of time. And then with Habibi at the end, literally just like being some random hookup that he decided to go back to Thailand with, and like the whole time he was there, he was once again like reminiscing on Gyu-ho and like his time there with Gyu-ho when they were on vacation. So it was kind of like not every relationship had the same emotional impact, but they all like impacted him in different ways and like were part of like him growing as a character. So I like that everyone was a little bit different, and everything wasn't like this is my end all be all romance. Like, you know, there were some that he knew he wasn't going to end up with that person, and that person knew they weren't going to end up together, and like it was all made sense to him at the moment, if that makes sense.
100%.
I'm really curious, just like what the general consensus is on Young's character, because I noticed that by the time he got into his relationship with Gyu-ho, I was kind of getting frustrated with him because I felt like in a way he kept self-sabotaging, because he kept emphasizing how like mundane his life was with Gyu-ho. Like all they did was work and then come home and like go to sleep and work and whatever. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, but that's life. Like it's not always going to be exciting, but the fact is supposed to be that you love this person. So like even the mundane, you love being mundane with them. So I got to a point where I was a little frustrated with him, because it was like he was really failing to find joy in the little things, which was so sad. It was so sad. And I was like, this person accepts you and loves you like as you are. But I guess if you're not fulfilled and happy with them, then
it kind of felt like he was looking for like a fictional big romance thing, right? He's the kind of person that I like hate because I don't like people who complain and don't do anything about it. Like no one is going to change your life for you. If you're not happy with how things are, do something. You can't complain that your relationship is boring and then you do nothing about it. Like communicate, do something. I don't know, but he was expecting too much as well, like the grand romance thing. But yeah,
I feel like it kind of goes back to that conversation that he had with Mie after he found out that she was getting married, and he was like, you know, people like me don't ever expect to have like a lasting romance. And so I think, you know, he talked about like having this fantasy of finding a person that will be there with you forever, but knowing that it's never actually going to be a reality. And so I feel like when he met that person that could have been like, you know, it's almost like because maybe like because of his experience as a queer person, especially in a country like Korea where like you can't date the same way like queer people necessarily can here in America and things like that. I feel like his idea, everything he experienced about romance up until that point and what lasting romance was only was a fantasy. So like when he finally entered a relationship that had the potential to be like his lasting relationship, like he took it for granted because he didn't necessarily know like what the element of a lasting relationship is, like that the mundane is going to be part of a long-term relationship because there's only so many new things you can do in life, you know? And so I feel like he almost didn't quite realize what he was experiencing with Gyu-ho while he was experiencing it, which is why we saw so much like, oh, this isn't exciting anymore. We don't have sex anymore. We don't do all of these things anymore. But then you see him reflect on it during the final 2 episodes with Habibi, and I think at that point he realized that he took it for granted because you know, it's not about necessarily finding this extreme fantasy, but, you know, that feeling of comfort and mundane that he took for granted with Yoo-ho in the moment, I feel like he realized looking back that, oh, that is what love is, like what long lasting love is. So it's almost like he it's quite literally the one that got away. And of course there was the element of like his HIV and him not necessarily being able to do travel Yoo-ho and go abroad, because that would have stopped him, and he didn't, I don't know the long distance thing, I think he didn't want to hold Yoo-ho back in that moment, which is also him self-sabotaging because he doesn't,
I mean,
I don't think he found himself worthwhile in a lot of things as well. He obviously has a lot of confidence issues, but yeah.
If he really wanted to keep that relationship, he could have found a way to be in that relationship.
I agree.
Yeah.
No matter how you had to make it.
I think for him, this was his way of letting Yoo-ho be happy, and he was self-sabotaging in that. But I think he saw himself holding Yoo-ho back, and so in that moment, he was like choosing to do something for Yoo-ho and like making it easier on both of them than trying to navigate that, but specifically on like Yoo-ho finding someone who he can have like a more normal relationship with, and where HIV isn't something they have to consider in everything they do and things like that. So yeah, he was peak self-sabotaging in like every single step of that story. And I think like because it wasn't a typical like romance or typical BL, however you want to say it, we don't necessarily see him work through that, because like it's something he's gonna have to continue to work on. So like we see the regret and we see him making these decisions that are frustrating, but we don't necessarily get the resolution to that you would get in like a typical story arc.
I think that this story is a very good representation of the fact that you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. Because the confidence you need and everything else, like if you don't love yourself, you're not going to be able to love someone else. And yeah, he had a lot to work through, and it took him a really long time to get to the point where he started working at it. But I also think like that's the happy ending, right? He realizes he needs to work on himself, and he starts growing up and working through it and just finding ways to be happy, but not necessarily the what everyone expects you to have to be happy. Because I feel like a lot of his expectations to life is rooted in fiction. Like I maybe it's because he's a writer that he sees the world through the lens of a writer and expects his life to be what he can imagine for a story. And that's just not life.
Yeah, I think he might have even said something similar to that, like maybe because I write these fictional romances and like these fictional happy endings, that like there was like this disconnect between it not actually being like that in his real life. But yeah, no, I think while you were saying that, I was thinking, I can't remember what his one friend's name was. Unsu, the one who ended up getting engaged, but then ended up like not marrying him. I feel like that was another like moment of fantasy breaking for Young, because like he had like that big grandiose proposal, or like they had broken up, and then like he came back and the guy was proposing for him, and the friend was like, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna marry him, because like he basically was like, why would I say no? And then like in the end, like the marriage ended up not happening. So I felt like that was another interesting moment that was kind of like, yeah, this is the reality. And like Young being the one to kind of be with his friend in the moment of like the aftermath of that proposal, and kind of seeing the way his friend reacted to some almost mundanely to something that should be like, you're being proposed to, it's like the happiest moment of your life, but like his reaction like did not live up to that. And so like I think they worked in these like little interesting elements that were like, yeah, like fantasy versus reality, and like what the reality of relationships are is something that he kind of had to navigate through other people and then like kind of, you know, work on at the end.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the big element that a lot of Young's, I guess, issues come from his mom. Yeah. That's the part that made me cry, is like that amount of time that was like her final days, basically, where they were kind of she was kind of like accepting him and how things are in like small ways, in her own way, not like super openly, but like in the way that she knew how, I guess, being so like conservative religiously and socially.
Yeah. I was very that scene with Young-soo, who was like the person he was dating, which that's this whole other story in and of itself, that whole relationship. But like Young-soo saying, like at some point when they were at dinner, to Young, like, oh, you can be more open about being queer because you were raised with love. And then you like juxtapose that with the flashback of his mom literally basically having him hunted down and sent to conversion therapy while he is begging her not to send him. And that like juxtaposition between like Young-soo saying like, oh, you were clearly raised with love, and I think that Young loves his mom, but obviously the religious upbringing and what she put him through sending him to conversion therapy had a huge toll on how he probably approach why his approach to romance is the way that it is, and also I think influenced him being more overt in his queerness, because he was basically, I feel like he got to a point probably where he was like, fuck it, like I'm going to be who I'm going to be because I was raised this way by my mom. So I of that like mom storyline, I thought that scene and like that kind of juxtaposition of, I guess, how people interpreted the way he acts as a queer person to mean that he was raised with so much love, like when the reality is that like his dad left them and his mom couldn't handle him being queer and sent him away because of it. Like, yeah, that those were the hardest episodes to watch. Oh my god, those 3 and 4. So much emotional turmoil in those 4 episodes.
I was like surprised by my own reaction to that whole situation, because obviously we keep seeing Young kind of like ditch his mom to go hang out with Young-soo, and part of me was like, why do you keep ditching your mom? She's dying. Like, why do you keep ditching her for this like guy who doesn't even like you? But then I was also like, yeah, but she has done some really bad things. So like I really surprised myself with like, I almost like had the same kind of attachment to that relationship as he would, where he loves his mom, but he's also like, fuck you, I'm gonna dip. It was a lot. It was very complex emotionally. I did hate that guy though. I hated him. Young-soo.
Oh, that storyline was the way my blood was boiling. That final dinner, and then he had the audacity to send him like notes on his book a year later. I was like, fuck you. I was so glad Young just threw that shit in the trash, and he was like, that's someone else's trash, not mine. Like, obviously, like, Young-soo also had a lot of repressed homophobia and was obviously channeling his own hatred of his queerness. Like, I know a lot of people interpreted it as him pretending to be queer to write his manuscript, but like, you don't fuck someone if you're only pretending to be queer. Like, that, a lot of people thought he only did it for the manuscript, and I was like, this is a man who clearly
I didn't think that.
There's probably a lot of men that use that excuse when they're engaging in
that's analytical. But he just hated the fact that he was queer so much, and he channeled, and that's why he hated Young, because Young does not hate the fact that he was queer, and he thought that's because Young was raised in acceptance, but really it's because Young had to fight to accept his own queerness after everything he went through with his mother. So like, that whole storyline was just so, and it sucks because like they did have such good chemistry. Like, some of the lines that like that man was delivering, I was like, you were saying he is like your universe, but then like you're turning, oh my god, it's so, It was a lot. That was an intense story.
Dude, you don't say and do that stuff without like
for science.
Yeah, no.
Never fuck someone in the ass for science, you know.
He's investigating.
Investigative journalism.
My God. Undercover.
Oh my gosh.
Great.
Yeah.
Undercover queer. That's great.
I did really feel bad that it seemed like he, at least not anytime soon, he would be at a place where he ever feels not trapped by his sexuality and like religion. Like I felt really bad for him because of that. But it's his personality that I didn't like. Like I thought he was so condescending. Such like an indie philosophy dude.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Oh, yeah. We all know the type.
I mean, I'm fine with watching it on my screen, but if I had met him in real life, I am not kidding. I might actually hit him.
See, I fear I would be no better than Young, and I would let that man ruin my life. Like, I would let that man ruin my life the same way Young did. I know I would be no better than him. Oh boy.
Oh my
Pixie,
God.
you're stronger than I am.
I was gonna say I'm just Norwegian, but yeah.
Oh my God.
We don't do bullshit.
I think it's definitely a story that makes you think a lot about it, and makes you reflect a lot, I think, on your own approach to relationships, especially like if you're also a queer person. And like I feel like a lot of queer people really saw themselves in Young and the way he was navigating his relationships and his queerness throughout the show and as he grew up. But yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to like put like a final thought together about this show because I feel like there's a lot that I like I'm still like thinking about when it comes to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I will say I think Nam Yoon-su as Young was incredible, and I think it really adds to how impactful this show was that he is like a fairly popular mainstream K-drama actor who took on this role and was also advocating very heavily for the show and pushing very heavily against like the protests against it. And like he essentially said like fuck you to everyone who is like protesting against this show. So like it's really like I think adds to the impact of having like someone who is mainstream, and because I think a lot of the other actors were like on the more indie side of things or newer to acting, but like him being someone who is already in the mainstream Korean entertainment industry, like writing so hard for the show and leading the show. And like I saw that he like turned down other projects while waiting for the show to go into development because he wanted to do it so much. So yeah, it was really cool to see like how strongly him and the entire cast like really advocated for and cared about the show. So yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot to think about that I'm also still working through. But I just have the like general thought of that I love what the show represents. And I did really like it. So,
yeah, same. I did really like it. I like that it's a little bit different from what we're used to. I like that we're going through his whole life and that is the plot. Like this is his life, and you see like a really obvious difference from the person he was when it started to how he is when it ends.
Yeah, the plot isn't like the point of the story isn't like the romances or anything like that, but like Young is the point of the story and his growth is the point of the story. And I think that makes it a really interesting show in like the sphere of BL. I know there are people who argue that like they wouldn't consider this a BL. I am not going to get into that argument. Like, for the purposes of this review, it is a BL, and that's what I'm going to consider it. But, you know, I think it offers a really different perspective in like the BL genre and like what we're typically watching in the BL genre, which definitely made it stand out. And just, yeah, like Kayla said, everything that it stood for and the fact that it was released despite all of the backlash. And I really love that so much of the community was like very loud about how much they were planning to watch and support the show, and like people going out of their way to support it on the platforms it was being released on, which I know is not an option for everyone. But like people really wanting to show like the South Korean entertainment industry that like the show was worthwhile. Like, you know, if that makes sense. And queer stories are worthwhile investing in. So I really liked what it did from like a community standpoint of people kind of banding together to be like, no, like if there's backlash against this show, then like we are gonna hype it up. And like you said, Kayla, I do think it was definitely worth the hype that everyone had built up around it. So
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we want to go through what ratings we would give it out of 5? I honestly, like, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, me neither. I think it's kind of complicated to give it a rating because there's so many facets of the story, and it's just there's a lot happening, so it's kind of hard to encompass it all into one rating. But if I have to say anything, I would probably put it at a 4 out of 5. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It's very hard to put a rating to it.
Man, I want to say 4.5 asterisk, 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 because I really, really appreciate it for what it was. And obviously, like, I love the execution of it. I love that we're like following this one character throughout the years through like his love life and his own like self-development. And I do love the ending and how it's not like this like full out like love romance story, and the whole point is that he like has to find contentment with himself and just like with his friends and everything. So like I like how everything turned out in the end too. But I'm not going to say 5 because there is a small part of me that really wanted him to be with Gyu-ho. And that's the BL brain.
Yeah. No, I think I would also land on a 4.5 asterisk, 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 asterisk. Honestly, for probably the same reason. Like, it's just the type of person that I am, that I always hope for the happy ending. Like, I think that his story and the way it ended absolutely makes sense from a character standpoint and from what we watched the entire way through. But I feel like even at the final scene, there was like me just hoping even for like the tiniest opening of like him and Gyu-ho reconnecting, even if they hadn't actually ended together.
Just like a text, just show a text showing up or something, like, how are you, kind of thing.
Purely my selfish brain and the way that I hope for stories to end. Like, it's nothing against the production or the character development of Young. Like I said, I think the way it ended for him made sense and was the way it needed to end for him. But from a selfish standpoint, I was just give me the tiniest bit of hope for the romance. Like, that's all I need. But I would 1000% like recommend the show for people to watch if they haven't already. So it's such a good show. It said so many good things, and I really appreciate that we got it at the time that we did. So
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to be all for this month's review. Be sure to let us know what you guys thought about Love in the Big City down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or Patreon, or feel free to add us over on our socials. We want to hear your guys' thoughts about the show, and we'd love to engage with you about it. So be sure to let us know. And a friendly reminder that all of our reviews are voted on by our patrons, and they do get access to watch them a month before they go up on YouTube. So if you're interested in choosing what series we review, you can consider joining our Patreon family, and that is also a great way to support the show if that's something you're interested in doing. But that is all for this month's review, and we will see you guys again next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.